Whoosh! That's what you get. I have Grammarly installed on my internet browser. I use Grammarly. I have it free. I don't have a subscription to it. I am extremely prone to typos, so I appreciate that. Usually it catches when I have a typo, when I've just dropped a word out of a sentence, just basic spell checker shit like that. I don't like how they updated their emojis. I don't know if I've used something that has had this functionality on it in a while, but the last time I used it, I noticed it has these little emojis on it that show you your tone. It show you like how you're writing as Grammarly expects it, interprets it, and the tone, the informative tone, which comes up a lot for me because I would use it to write scripts on the Celtics and or Celtics browser situation. So I would have dialogue, but I'd have these large chunks of describing the scene, which Grammarly would interpret as informative, which it changed from just an emoji guy with glasses to an emoji guy with glasses holding his mouth open in a soy face with braces. And I was like, fuck off. Fuck off with that. And I'll also use it to draft, shit like this in this sort of tone where, again, insults don't hurt you when they're completely out of left field. If insults aren't tapping into an insecurity you have, and an insecurity you have is you just a part of your voice in your head, like I don't know if that your super ego recognizing your awareness that other people would be totally right to see you in this flawed way, to recognize your flaws, but you as yourself, like the central protagonist voice saying nuh-uh. And then as soon as someone provides you actual evidence that no, that voice where you doubted yourself at first, where you thought this is probably how people would see me in this unpleasant light, as soon as that gets confirmed, like that's an insult. And if you have the capacity to love the rest of the people in the world, or at the very least, like love your friends and family, then those can be jokes. Those can be, shucks, that is how people see me. But that's not the single tether that binds me to reality. So I'm not insulted by that. And also I have the social wherewithal to be able to recognize that they're the things about them. And I can jab back and we can joust and we can duel and we can spar. And at the end of the day, we know that we're not invalidating each other's existence. Where if you have confidence that that's not what's happening, that someone else isn't trying to invalidate your existence, then you can have those kind of jokes. Me, I'm on those tethers. Like I can count the strings that keep me above the threshold of like life and death, of permission to exist, like not even flourishing. I'm so far beyond flourishing. Flourishing is like the second floor, and I am in the sub basement of merely being permitted to exist. Let alone flourishing, let alone being accepted by society. And when you can see those tethers and a fucking spell checker of all things comes at you and is like, yes, absolutely, obviously, when you speak in this tone of voice, when you have this sort of diction, when you have this sort of manner of speaking, this sort of delivery, this sort of framing, people see you in that way because you don't have an iota of what it would take to pull off genuinely smug. Maybe I'll get to it today, frankly. I have 3 case studies in smug that I'd like to discuss. But that's not what I'm starting off on. I'm starting off talking about Grammarly, which is that as much as I appreciate having a spell checker, and I think Grammarly is a pretty good spell checker, although sometimes it switches words back to words that I don't want it to use, and sometimes it just like doesn't recognize what I'm doing and is like, wouldn't it be better if you like deleted half this sentence? I'm like, that's the point of the sentence. Aside from those, Grammarly is a pretty decent spell checker that you can count on consistently across multiple platforms, which I think is important because the thing about all spell checkers is the extent to which they alter your voice, right? The extent to which altering your voice is deceptive and, to get to the heart of the matter, cheating. Awful. Terrible. Like I said before, it's hard to make good food when it's so bitter. What the fuck? Yeah. So my featuring terrible spaghetti is there. Your voice is your voice. Your decision on how to say stuff comes directly out of your mind. And the more that's mediated, the less that's actually you. And I think because I have a closed mindset of learning. Now, this got really popular a few years ago, and then obviously there was the extremely predictable reaction to it and people dunking on it. I still can't shake this notion of thinking about how people think. It seems to perfectly describe the sorts of people I see. And maybe it does so in like the bullshit post hoc Evo psych way of like just looking at stuff and then rationalizing back from it rather than actually being anything predictive or analytical or useful. But nevertheless, closed thinking, open thinking. That when you learn as a kid, that the sort of praise you get, the things you do that get you the positive attention and affirmation that builds up your understanding of how and why you should participate in the world. If that starts coming from things that you achieve effortlessly and you just kind of being yourself, then you learn that being smart, that being good is measured by the amount of accolade you can accumulate without trying. That when you are praised by the teacher as, the internet's full of gifted kids, but the world is full of stupid people somehow. That when you are praised as gifted, when you show up on the day and just kind of, do whatever, and you get an A-, and the teacher goes like, that was really good. You're so clever. You learn, okay, being clever is not having to try. And then inevitably, these people, whether it is high school like it was for me, whether it's college like it was for a friend of mine, like it's right after college, like some other friends of mine, regardless of when, people with that mindset, with the closed learning mindset, inevitably hit a wall where what comes naturally for them just pursuing their own interests in their free time and just however their mind works to synthesize the raw information that they gather into useful things that they can discuss with others, that'll reach a maximum capacity. The dividends will stop. They'll hit diminishing returns on that. And then they will realize that they have arrived at a place in their lives where they have to do work to continue succeeding, let alone excelling, like even like passing the checks that are coming their way. They have to work to continue that, and they don't know how. They don't have the habits, they don't have the mindset, they don't have the philosophy, they don't have the outlook that facilitates them being able to do that. Best case scenario. Best case scenario, they're simply reaching into their toolbox for tools they don't have. In my case, in a lot of people's cases, worst case scenario, they have learned that reliance on those tools is an admission of weakness. They have spent so much of their lives somehow, by the grace of literally God, being able to finish carpentry projects by punching nails, that they have taught themselves that those who rely on hammers are losers. And then they get to a job where they need a nail gun, and you're fucked, basically. Me coming from that mindset, which I have, which like I believe in the same way that I believe English, which is not to say any sort of elitist sort of, linguist superiority, like I believe English is the best language, but merely literally that I think in English because English is the only language I know. I look at the world and I frame things in the structural terms that my brain understands from knowing English. That's what I mean. In the same way that my world is shaped by the language I speak, my understanding of myself and my understanding of intelligence is shaped by what could be called the closed learning mindset. Coming from that, a spell checker is basically cheating. Like if you're not stopping with a word you don't recognize and going through the process of like looking it up in the dictionary, which again, completely archaic, but an acceptable tool in the toolkit based off of what was available to me while I was still being praised for being so darn smart. Looking stuff up in the dictionary is encapsulated under part of what I consider to be not trying. In so much as it is still like the reward of getting the correct spelling of the word is matched with, like, there's an appropriate amount of labor that goes into it, which is, using the dictionary. That process fits the reward for it, and therefore that's fair, despite the fact that it comes from outside yourself. In the same way that the proper way to nail a nail is to use your fist, and I'm going to get really tangled up in this metaphor. In the same way that a closed learning mindset could be compared to learning that the best way to nail a nail is to use your fist, and that the bruises and cuts and abrasions and lacerations that you receive in the process of punching a nail into a plank of wood is what earns the nail being nailed, and that makes it fair. Using a dictionary, despite the fact that it is outside yourself, counts. Using a spell checker doesn't count. And this extends, again, this is not to say that this is a valid, correct, useful, productive way of looking at the world. Spaghetti. This is merely another episode in the continuing process of me talking through every minute detail of thought process that I can identify. With all that said, that established, Grammarly making suggestions about like real editing choices, sentence structure, diction, word order. So much cheating, I can barely even fathom it. To me, seeing an editor, like this was something that was readily available, again, to the kids who should have been in university. I'm going to get to this because this is about university ultimately. The kids for whom university was actually for, who had their essays finished a week in advance and then had enough time to edit them, or better yet, take them to the teaching assistants who had hours in the library where you could go and they would read your essay and give you editing feedback. Those are the people that university should actually be for. Like, that's who the university admission process is supposed to select for. People who have the work ethic to be prepared enough to take advantage of the resources around them. That's what, because you can't simply be like a hermit autodidact. You don't go to university to be a weirdo who doesn't need to interact with his intellectual peers. Because there is no intellectual who doesn't interact with his intellectual peers. I'm sure there's some exception that someone can bring up to prove the rules. But the rule is that these people who stand out as like great men in the history of academia didn't truly just sit around and discover all their stuff by themselves. They were parts of movements, they were parts of groups, they were competing against other groups, they had their initial hypotheses challenged by competing ideologies and needed to improve their ideas. I'm thinking specifically of Louis Pasteur disproving the theory of spontaneous generation, which is only at the top of my mind because I had a conversation about it like last week. But in the process of proving germ theory, of proving that pasteurization, the slow heating, gentle heating, and cooling of like a biological material, like milk or bread or whatever, could preserve it by killing the germ of infection, which is to use germ in like the archaic sense, not just the microorganism that causes disease, but like the thing from which life sprouts, in the same way that the center of a clove of garlic is still called the germ. To prove germ theory, he had to come up with, sorts of bottles that allowed dust to enter and air to enter in certain ways, such that he could prove like there was a essential life force in this meat or what have you, but because of the shape of the spout of this bottle, the microscopic germs and maggot eggs and what have you can't fall onto it. So air can still reach it, so I'm not just choking out the life force, but I'm proving that there is something that is so small we can't see it, that needs to, from the ambient atmosphere, reach the biological medium in order to grow to become what we recognize as, mold or maggots or, like evident visible signs on a human scale of danger and unhealth. He didn't just get up one day and do all of that and just prove it by, he didn't have the idea on Sunday, work on it Monday, and then prove it by Tuesday. He came up with a process of, heating and cooling and sealing that he thought demonstrated it well enough, and then somebody else pushed back against him. And then he pushed back against them and came up with a more complicated and intricate experiment. And if you're not willing to do that, if you're incapable of doing that, If your intellectual process is to go off by yourself and just do whatever satisfies you, then you're not really an intellectual. I win. I win. I win. I think I have to have some potatoes for later. Universities, by design, aren't simply correspondence courses, or they haven't, since their conception, trended towards becoming correspondence courses, because part of what they check for is the ability to collaborate. Part of what they offer is the opportunity for like-minded people to associate and collaborate, even outside of strict academia. Like, what is it? The Canadian modernists all met at university. You know, the number of bands that have been formed out of people at university. Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie met on like the, what was it, like the kayak team or the canoe team, I think, at Oxford. And then they went on to be like a sketch comedy duo. That's part of what university is checking. And I'm going to, like, obviously it's more complicated than this, but the sole reason why people like me are allowed to participate in university is so the university has more money. Solely. Only reason why. Because otherwise they would have looked at, you know, my transcripts, read it a bit more closely than simply he passed, you know, and see that all of my extracurricular qualifications were things that I did barely, begrudgingly, achieved the bare minimum in, and said, wait a second, you know, due to the program that this guy was in, I did IB. I'm an IB kid, everybody. I'm an international baccalaureate kid. And look at where it got me. They would have looked at that context and seen that, wow, everything this person did was the bare minimum of their context. Just because they opted into a context in which the bare minimum kind of sits at or around like a good to decent standard for like a core stream sort of thing, we should look at the fact that within the context that he chose to be in, this was all obligatory. This is all mandated. This is all required of him. He literally only accomplished what he had to, what he was explicitly told he had to. And even then, some of it was fudged because he was just, you know, already by the end of high school on a fast track to rock bottom. Not conducive to a collaborative academic environment, not conducive to excellence or achievement, merely conducive to achieving most of the checks on a checklist to move on to the next stage of life, still permitted. Even then, even coming out of high school, I was already dealing with these tenuous links to being permitted to exist. And if the university system functioned the way a university system should, there should have been a mechanism in place to detect that and root me out before I had the opportunity to waste 6 years of my life getting a 4-year bachelor's degree. Like, proof meat pudding, you know? Like, I don't need, and I have this conversation in my personal life. People say, well, you still finished. I'm like, yes, but look, like, surely we can say, even if we stop ourselves from saying that was the wrong decision, we can say that the factors we were looking at in influencing that decision were probably actually wasn't the whole picture. Like we were ignoring several things, and we were ignoring a number of potentially more productive and potentially more honest options. Even if some of the most honest options weren't particularly productive, which is what I believe, which is like, auto Michael extinction button, go. The fact that people in positions to make those decisions were not considering what the alternatives were, right, was still kind of treating finishing the bachelor's degree as, within a certain context of me, the bare minimum. There wasn't really an alternative to doing that was seriously considered. That's not an achievement, right? That's the proof that even given the advantages and privileges of my context, that I shouldn't have been given that opportunity. I shouldn't have been put in that position because it was a waste of everybody's time, and generously, it was even a waste of my time. Generously, it was definitely a waste of everybody else's time who had to put up with my shit and coddle me like a fucking boiled egg, which is a stupid thing to say. I could have just said egg, because a coddled egg is not a boiled egg, and that's exactly what I mean. If I was somebody, had ever been somebody who could do this, but sit down and have the patience and work ethic and wherewithal to construct this argument, which is supposed to be about Grammarly and has not been for like 10 minutes, construct this argument and then present it soundly, then I would have been a good candidate for university. But instead, I'm somebody with no impulse control. I'm somebody who needs instant validation. I'm somebody who can't suspend my desire for gratification, so much so that I would rather do this and humiliate myself in front of an audience of future alien conquerors, hello aliens, instead of actually doing anything that any currently alive human would ever be interested in subjecting themselves to. And spell checkers helped me trick the world. We're back on track, baby. Spaghetti. Currently, I'm going to get myself another coffee. And you guys all listen to the coffee machine gurgle. I'm actually going to be a real self-loathing sicko and just gargle the water through the same instant coffee pod. What's the worst that could happen? The current run of Grammarly ads that I am subjected to on YouTube revolve around Grammarly personified as a coach character who encourages students to use the functionality of Grammarly to get their ideas across. As if university, part of what it's supposed to be testing, again, closed mindset, looking at university as a 4-year-long test rather than a learning experience, a developing experience. Part of what the experience of university is supposed to me, be testing is not just the quality of ideas you might have, but your ability to communicate them. In fact, I'd argue that it has much more to do with your ability to communicate ideas than to generate your own ideas, because as we all know, most university professors, most classes aren't built around, until you're in 4th year or sometimes even doing your master's degree, not built around the student generating their own unique ideas, but demonstrating comprehension. And it is part of the cycle, the part of the systemic problem that has been going on for generations. See, oh, it looks watery. It even looks bad. Like, I don't know if I've seen coffee look this bad. I've probably seen worse looking coffee. Let's see. It's hot. It's hot. Smells burnt and shitty. Yeah. Tastes like the coffee I deserve. Tastes like the coffee that would happen if you made coffee for someone you hated. So the boomers. The boomers all had great jobs with lots of union support and representation at a time when the minimum wage was still strong, productivity was up, even during periods when it was decoupled or in the process of decoupling from inflation and productivity rise. Even then, it was still pretty close because like it didn't have as much time as it has by now to utterly diverge. So they were dealing with a strong minimum wage, low gas prices, racist government subsidies that wanted to give white people as much as quickly as the government could before black people had an opportunity to really establish themselves in the market and get anything for themselves. And so by these factors combined, they had great, great lives, like compared to what we have to live, compared to what your children will be. Again, human audience, your children, compared aliens, compared to what your records will show for the rest of human history from this moment onwards. The boomers had significantly better lives by default. The white boomers. I don't know if I hear the word boomer used to refer to non-white populations. Like when I think boomer, I think it implies whiteness. I can't tell if that's a function of my own racism or if that's a function of the racism inherent in the term, or if I'm just stupid. Spaghetti! Yes, swirl up the spaghetti. Stupidity spaghetti. All right. The boomers had great lives. And because of capitalism, because of the Cold War, couldn't say were politically prevented from saying that like enough is enough. We're motivated by every facet of their culture, right? To want more, to not just settle for enough so that everyone could have enough, because like I said, they were pawns on a board of chess playing an extremely racist game. So to start acknowledging anything like we should start making stuff fair for everybody would have been, included in that. We should start making stuff fair for black people, which was not the point. Couldn't say that. Couldn't look to the East and say, you know what, the Soviet Union, for all its problems, has obviously, this information was suppressed in the West, obviously, but has resulted in the steepest and fastest rise in quality of life, perhaps in history. Maybe there's something to the notion of sharing. Maybe there's something to the idea of nationalizing healthcare, education, housing, job distribution, production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Couldn't say that. That would get you whatever they did to communists. Did they just shoot them in the street? Again, to any alien who discovers this, I'm a complete fucking historically illiterate idiot. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But what I mean is that aside from their own, I'd personally like to have a bigger car because there are bigger cars on the market. The entire market was about selling more. The entire advertising world, the entire media world was about having more. It was about infinite growth. It was about historically unprecedented prosperity that people didn't have any reason to think should end, not because they didn't have any reason to sit down and like do the math and predict that, wait a second, it has to end eventually, right? Like it's not the entire, even if the entire planet was full of oil, like it was the sky, the dirt, the crust, the ocean, and then oil all the way down, even if that were the case, which is not, even if that were the case, eventually we'd run out. Not that people had no reason to think it would run out, but people had no reason to think about the fact that obviously it had to run out eventually. Like, and if it was thought about, perhaps it's just as simple as the fact that it was contextualized as it's not going to run out anytime soon. It's not going to run out in our lifetimes. Like, even if that was the miscalculation that like it did run out kind of at the tail end of your lifetime, but like, did you not think you were going to have kids and grandkids and you wanted their life to be just as good? Did you seriously not stop to think for a minute that like, wait a second, eventually the world's going to fill up with stuff or run out of stuff to make more stuff? Again, I don't blame, as I've said on other streams, I don't blame any individual boomer for failing to do that calculus, because that's, I think, kind of not really their responsibility, especially when they're immersed in a culture that has every financial and political incentive literally in the world to keep them from thinking about it. But surely someone must have thought about it. But more importantly than that, despite the fact that they had great lives, they were kept from acknowledging that like our lives are currently great and we don't need more to have a great life. And they were prevented from even considering that like maybe this is enough. The research didn't exist to say that there is a maximum amount of money that improves quality of life. And past that, like it might correlate with an increased accumulation of material assets, but that doesn't correlate or correspond to an increased self-reported happiness. Like that research didn't exist because, again, why would you do that research? Why would you do it at that time? Like you'd be a huge bummer. So despite the fact that even working class boomers' lives were great, they looked at the middle class and they looked at people who had the opportunity, people whose parents had the opportunity to send them to university, like legacy upper class people that were kind of getting squished into the middle class, you know, upper middle class people, previously like middle class people who, due to increased social mobility, were able to step up into the higher class, people who were who had legacies as universities and their kids were guaranteed to get in, people who could just pay off the admissions boards, you know, or just give like, you know, donate a new fucking wing to the university library. Like, I guess we're going to have to take their kid to go to the library now because that's just how quid pro quo works. They saw those kids and they were like, wait a second, my life is great and pretty much perfect, actually, but their lives are better. They're my boss. They went to university. I live a perfect life working under them because capitalism is so prosperous right now that even the working class have it great. But they are still my boss. They still have a bigger car. They could probably fuck my wife, etc. Man, the waves are big today. Spaghetti. Despite the fact that I have enough for me and mine, due to the fact that I conceptualize those around me as mine, I have a perpetual insecurity that they could be taken away from me. Despite the fact that my life is totally secure, I have created insecurity by the attempt to possess and own everything around me. Simple survival, way gone. Simple, like, comfort, way gone. But being the king of the proverbial castle is now my goal. And once again, I've been returned to the psychic war of all against all. Like, we have contracts in place, yes, but contracts are just agreements. Yes, God literally has approved my contracts, but like, we've witnessed the Holocaust. You know, we've witnessed the fact that those contracts can be broken. The only thing keeping us together is our word. And I know, because I'm bombarded with the message constantly, that if I see an opportunity to get ahead for myself, and it means leaving mine behind, I'm supposed to. Not that I naturally would, but my society bombards me with the message that I should. And I have to assume that everybody else thinks the same way, and that they are looking at my stuff. They are looking at my people. They want to corrupt what is good about my life in order to create more advantages for themselves. Therefore, I'm unable to say something like, my life is good enough, we can maintain this. If we don't push for constant growth, constant accumulation, then nobody will have to steal from me. If we don't push for the biggest company constantly consuming the next biggest company, if we don't constantly trend towards private monopoly, if we're not constantly searching for greater ways to express profit, then people will never have to steal from me. But we do, so they do. And because of that, I'm insecure. And because of that, I don't want someone to be my kid's boss. I want my kid to be the boss. I don't want my family, I don't want mine to be taken advantage of. I want mine to be the ones taking advantage. So they all sent their kids to university. They all wanted their kids to have the qualifications to be the boss without considering, what if everybody else sends their kids too? Oh, because, I'm special and I'm actually the center of the world and I'm a human and I'm only capable of perceiving a fixed amount of the world around me. And really, on average, my mind isn't really designed to contemplate. What was that? This is a cell phone too. My mind isn't really designed to contemplate the great overarching mechanisms of, like, the global economy or even the national economy. My mind is good to kind of balance the resource management and political and religious situation in, like, a small to medium village. Like, what is it? It's like 100 friends, right? That's the statistic that, like, humans can know 100 people. And then when you start to know more people than that, like, you're not really meeting new people. You're just compartmentalizing, like, enough details to recognize them and, like, pass off as knowing them. It's like 100, right? Like, you can only have 100 friends or know 100 people, something like that. So because of this shortcoming, which really shouldn't be a shortcoming, we should just build society around that rather than trying to make humans live in a society that they're not built or capable or have any need to live in. We say, okay, now you all make the decision for how you want your kid to participate in the future. And everybody said, I want them to be a boss. I want them to hire other people. I want them to exploit their excess labor. I want them to extract the excess value they create through their labor. But everybody put their hands up and they all said that at once. And so all their kids went to university, failing to recognize that employers aren't looking for qualifications to see who can do the job. They're looking for qualifications that distinguish a worker from the available pool of workers. And if you don't think that's the case, then simply look at the fucking world around you. Look at the plethora look at the current labor crisis. The current labor crisis of employers want to pay minimum wage for people with a bachelor's degree, ideally a master's degree, and 4 years experience in a job that has only existed for 3 years. And then it sounds like an over exaggeration, and that's a joke. But I mean, it is a joke because it's hilarious, but it's also true. It's literally true. Programming languages, I've heard anecdotally, accounts and forums under job postings of people reporting, I have seen job applications that by managers, so not actual people versed in the thing they're supposed to be managing, tipping their hands that they're clueless middlemen who don't actually understand their work, asking for people with experience in programming languages that exceed the lifetime of the programming language. Those are the sorts of people making decisions about who gets hired. They're not aware, but more importantly, they don't care that they want more experience than is literally possible, because they don't care about the qualifications, because the qualifications don't matter as qualifications. They're not looking for anybody who can do the job, which is what people were looking for during like the labor shortages that boomers and maybe even Gen X, not really, but boomers were dealing with, where there was so much prosperity, so much production, so much work to be done that, the old story that we all know as millennials growing up of our parents telling us, well, just walk into the place and hand your resume to the manager. And we're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Well, that's how it used to work. You used to be able to walk up to an auto shop, anecdotally, a little bit of, fictionalization here, exaggeration for the sake of the parable. But it used to go, more or less, you walk up to an auto shop and you say, hey, man, I'm looking for some work. And they say, you know how to turn a wrench? You say, uh-huh. And they say, you know what a carfibulator is? And you go, sure do. They say, get started on that one. That's the myth. But like myths are born out of basically reality. And the world stopped working like that because although production has gone up, like it's gone up through automation. And although production has gone up, it hasn't gone up in like manual fields. I was watching something the other day talking about how everywhere there are so many job openings and there's so many unemployed. And they're like, well, because the skills don't really match up. They're looking for people in tech, in middle management, in healthcare. And like there are still shortages in those areas because people don't have training in those specific fields, because those are the specific fields that are still expanding, especially because of COVID. Like there's an infinite demand for cheap to free healthcare labor since the entire planet is dying. Shit. But yeah, people are no longer looking for, you know how to use a wrench. Do you know how, I said defibrillator, kind of purposely, because I don't know what I don't understand automobiles. I have no talents. I have no skills. I am a complete burden on reality. I have completely unemployable spaghetti. Not only because employers are looking for a more complex job, hiring for a more complex job than turning a wrench or repairing a car. Not to say repairing a car isn't complicated, but I'm just saying that, like, it's material, it's practical. You can understand it without a large amount of abstraction. Like, you literally repair the car. If a part needs to be replaced, you literally replace the part. And therefore, it's more within a sphere that, like, you can grasp through practice, through apprenticeship. It's more of a trade, which are important, which are essential. But it takes a different sort of learning process to master a trade, or to be proficient in a trade, or even be able to do the basic tasks of a trade, than it does to, become proficient in the level of abstraction required to code or perform middle management or perform healthcare. You don't have the option to teach somebody on the job how to be a nurse, right? Because if you're watching somebody and they start to unscrew the humbucker, which is a guitar thing. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself. If you say unscrew that there, and they start to unscrew the part next to it, you can say, not that, dummy, that. And then don't make that mistake again. If that's a nurse and you say, give them some of that medicine, and they start to administer the medicine next to them, maybe they've just killed the patient, If you unscrew something in a car, you can probably screw it back in. Maybe, not really so with a human body, or less importantly, with everybody's paychecks this week, right? Because of that abstraction, because of that automation, because of the stakes involved in failure. Different sort of learning process. Not only due to that has the job market changed, but because employers still have the same fucking problematic mindset that the boomers had when they all decided all of their kids should get to be bosses at once. They still don't want good enough. They want the best of the best. And when the most of the pool of workers who could do the job have the same qualifications, the capitalist impulse is to perform inflation, basically, to increase your requirements because you want the best, and everybody else can hire the people who can do their job, but your business, you deserve the person who's the best at the job. And sometimes if you're a fucking idiot middle manager who has no fucking idea about the actual work being performed, that means getting the best of the best to work at your very special business. It's more important than anybody else's because that's the one where you worked at. And that's the one where if it fails, people will take everything that belongs to you because they will absorb you and your business and your property and your relationships and make them all theirs. Sometimes when that's the impulse you're chasing, it means making the job requirements literally more than is possible. Sometimes it means asking for 5 years of experience in a coding language that has only existed for 4 years. Generally not. Usually it's asking for a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and 5 years experience in a job that's existed for more than 5 years. But people who have been working at it for more than 5 years, like they have the job, they have that experience. They're getting snatched up. And you don't want to lower, once you've set the bar that high, changing your job requirements is like lowering the bar. Like we're going to, accept a lower class of worker? We're just going to accept that about ourselves, about our business, about our prospects for competing in the kill or be killed market of capitalism. Now, literally, like this is not kill or be killed in the sense that a high energy competitive market was before, because now a kill or be killed market, and this is especially America I'm talking about, of course, because I'm inundated with American media, despite the fact that I live in Canada. Things are probably different in Canada because we have healthcare. Look at me. I haven't had a job. I've completely flunked out of life, and I'm not dead yet. But I have never had COVID. Because now, especially in America, accepting that you are the second best firm and absorption, buyout, destruction, dissolution is in your future immediately, because that's what happens to second best. Second best gets eaten by the best. That means accepting within the foreseeable future, you will lose your employer provided healthcare benefits. You will lose the ability to continue paying your rent, or you'll have to pay like 24 months back rent all at once, moratorium, all that bullshit. You will lose your healthcare. You will lose the ability to house yourself. You will catch COVID, and you will literally die. So what do? You don't accept second best. You continue to hold out for the person who is so desperate that they somehow either like lie or scramble together enough half-truths that it looks like they have that much experience, just so you can say to yourself, at least I didn't knowingly shoot my entire family in the face. At least I thought I was playing Russian roulette and there was only one bullet in the chamber. That's not the chamber. The chamber is the actual part that shoots. One bullet in the... Not smart. Ugh. And Grammarly, in being an automated service that provides that even to the kids like me who are writing their 4,000-word essay at lunchtime the day the assignment is due, and did it an A-, by the way. Like I pulled that off. I pulled that off once specifically that I remember very strongly, where I slapped together an essay basically the day of and got an A- on it. And the teacher said, this is kind of disappointing. Like it checks a lot of the boxes for grading, but it really doesn't feel like you performed that much analysis. And it sucked because through it, through parroting back a bunch of the points that had been made in class that the teacher had like visibly agreed with, by like flipping through the book in question and pulling out chunks and quotes that seemed to directly either address my point, I actually had a lot of fun. And I was like, oh, I think I'm actually like engaging with the material. I engaged with the material for a few hours and realized in the process that it was thoroughly enjoyable and I loved doing it and I felt good about myself. And my regret was I wish I had spent more time doing this. I would have enjoyed it and I would have made a better essay. I would have been more honest. I wouldn't have had to perform a deception on my teacher of seeming like I was somebody who gave a shit, who was responsible and capable, et cetera, instead of just a phony who is only not flunking out because I'm good enough to lie about being good. That's it. I'm not good, evidently. If anybody had put my feet to the fire. I remember I had another class, I think the same year, where I made a point to make one comment every class so it looked like I was paying attention. out of like the 9 books, maybe 8, 9 books on the syllabus, I think I read one of them. I flipped through some of the others, and my tactic was to find topics in the discussion in the book that seemed to relate somehow to The Great Gatsby. And I would relate them back to The Great Gatsby, treating it like it was so fundamental and essential an American text that all other American texts could be meaningfully compared to it. And fortunately, I had somebody in that class who had gone to the same high school as me, who had been in the same class in high school as me. So even when my points were like completely half-assed and incoherent, and I remember one time specifically, the teacher basically said, "What does that mean to me? The thing, what you just said, what does that mean?" That person was able to jump in and clarify based off of their mutual understanding of The Great Gatsby from having taken the same classes. Thank God. I'm grateful every time I consider the story for that person for having enough mercy, because I knew they knew what I was doing too. Maybe they didn't say it out loud, but I knew that they had the option to choose whether to scornfully reject my pathetic attempts at validation, or to just throw me the bone. And more times than not, they threw me the bone. So much so that towards the end of the class, the teacher, not responding to me specifically, was like, "Oh, we've talked about The Great Gatsby a lot in this class." Not really what I expected, but that's kind of how it worked out. So, and then brought up something about how maybe the story was sort of like something that happened in The Great Gatsby himself. And I was like, I've steered the direction of the conversation through my sheer commitment to ignorance. And then at the end of the year, when I had to go to that teacher and say my final assignments aren't done, I am terrified. I am asking for an ill in this class. I'm asking for, instead of a failing grade, to be marked as too mentally ill to be fairly graded. I've already paid the money and I'll get any sort of refund, blah, blah, blah. I just want to mark it as an ill on my transcript. And they had said, yes, because you've come to class, you've done you've done the assignments up until now, you've done the bare minimum, not what he said, but what he meant, what he should have meant. And you've always made an effort to contribute to the class conversations. So I don't hesitate giving this to you. I'm, to be honest. And he was honest with me. He was like, "There's another student who's approached me and they've been very much absent and unresponsive. And now they're coming asking for the same thing you're asking for. And I have a lot more reservations about giving it to them. But for you, I feel very good doing. I hope you get better. I hope you see your way through this." And I felt fucking terrible. I felt so awful, because maybe this was the teacher just demonstrating their ability to perform. Maybe that was all an act and they too were being merciful. I'd like to think that, because the alternative is that I just completely, fully fooled them. Because the fact of the matter is, I was not mentally ill. If being bad at university makes you mentally ill, then I was mentally ill. I would argue that university isn't for most people. It's like, to invert the example I was using earlier, giving somebody a wrench, saying, "Please fix this car," and when they don't fix the car, saying, "Have you tried serotonin reuptake inhibitors?" It's preposterous. It's laughable. I mean, I was disturbed. I was in a very bad emotional state because it had been taken as granted. It was an assumption that I also, not blaming the people around me, like my family or friends who all just went to university because they were supposed to have, because they wanted me to, but also an assumption I made about myself that of course I would go to university because I'm not like some working class guy who learns a fucking trade. So I was a piece of shit in high school and in university. But I was in an extremely dark emotional place because I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Because I had made the assumption that what you do when people call you smart when you're a kid is you go to university and then you just do university because that's what it is. As far as the market is concerned, university, because it's basically expected that you go to university, is the new previous qualification, the qualification previously known as high school diploma. Before everybody went to university, and I say everybody explicitly as like a generalized presumption that does not actually include everybody, as a, knowingly, and I haven't hinted at this up until now, so I apologize, but as an explicitly elitist assumption that like everybody who's anybody goes to university. And that failing out of university is a particularly poignant and specific mar on somebody's, not just transcript in the sense of academia or resume in the sense of the market, but just in the sense of their life history. I personally know a number of people who unambiguously put forward the idea, just believe, like, I would not date somebody who hadn't finished university. Which, again, mythically, because I wasn't really around or alive during this time, but like that used to be high school, right? That used to be if you were kind of like some friggin' burnout guy who like, was good with his hands, but not really like good with like books or whatever, then maybe you flunked out of high school at like grade 11 and went straight into learning how to do a trade or learning how to be like a criminal or something, right? And now that's university. Because job qualifications, as I've said, don't have anything to do with measuring whether or not you could do the work. They are, for a lot of managers, searches for the bestest specialist person to work at their bestest, very special business, because that business succeeding is literally a matter of life or death for them. They don't want second best. They don't want somebody who can just do the work, because someone who can just do the work is only sufficient in a system where failure isn't punished as gravely as it is in our system, where even if you're not at the top of your field, at like on the top of the dog pile of the marketplace, then you even get a shot at a comfortable life. Going back to what I've discussed previously about this, given inflation, 96,000, 100,000 a year income, that seems to be the point at which money no longer correlates with an increased self-reported happiness. If that were in any measure achievable by a job without those very strict requirements, then the fear of not having somebody with those requirements would go away, right? You'd be able to just hire somebody who could just do the work if just doing the work was the work. But just doing the work isn't the goal. The work is a means to an end. And that end is the pursuit of domination of the market, capitalist monopoly, irreplaceability, unexchangeability. because enough isn't enough. You need to exceed. You need to exceed so much that you're put in a strategic position to be able to crush your competition, to make sure that they are not about to murder you. And, murder you, put you out of business, compete you into a lower market share. It's all the same thing under the current system, especially in America, where, it's either I hire, as I've already said, reiterating, either I hire not only a qualified person, but the most qualified person, or I accept that I am in the crosshairs for the fate of losing my employer provided healthcare, losing my housing, losing my ability to buy food for my family, being able to keep my family, identifying as my family, and, keeping my life. Not even keeping my life at the precarious level of petit bourgeois comfort that it's at, but literally staying alive. If I don't have employer provided healthcare and I get COVID, I'm dead. If my business goes under because I hired somebody who could just do the work rather than some sort of idiot savant who has somehow been working in a programming language for longer than it's existed, if I'm not getting the literal cream of the crop, then I am admitting that I am in that below number one position, aka prey in the market. And Grammarly spell checkers are a function within that. If everybody writes in the same creative voice that Grammarly editing provides, then that's another way that employers can't distinguish people based off of any sort of personality, any sort of ability to actually collaborate with people. If your voice is mediated by a computer's decision, by what the board of directors and managers have told the programmers at Grammarly what a sentence should look like, if you eliminate that criteria, that available information to analyze, then that's no longer something an employer can balance against and say, well, this person has more years of experience, but this person's writing sample really appeals to me on some sort of intangible, non-capitalist way. That's eliminated. So it's only who has the most number of qualifications, who has biggest number, who has best grades, who has most years of experience. It's only that. It's only the mechanical numerical analysis of experience. And then the only way you can look for the person who's best for your business, when that's all the information you have to analyze, is I want person with biggest number, regardless of whether or not that number is feasible, because you've eliminated the actual person and their actual ideas and their actual compatibility with other people from what you're able to judge them on. And in the same way, then, if everybody's getting a better grade because they're all using Grammarly, then the qualifications need to go up again. If you just set the baseline, this is just the notion of inflation, right? If everybody has $1 and a piece of bread costs $1, and then you give everybody another $1, then the motherfuckers selling the bread are just going to make bread cost $2, which again is like a decision. Richard Wolff puts this beautifully and succinctly and honestly in a video where he explains employers set prices, owners set prices. They decide when there's more money in the market, either I can sell more stuff for the same, or I can sell the same amount of stuff for more rather. Either I can do more business, or I can just make everything that's already on my shelves cost that much more. That's a decision that people make. And you can say, like, oh, it's a market force. Oh, it's a market force. That's a decision people make. The same capitalist impulse that makes people need to do that, rather than say, oh, good, now everybody can have a bit more bread. Say, no, everybody gets the same amount of bread. And we still waste the same amount of bread, too. I watched a video right before I came on. It was like common sense economics, and it was dealing with the problem of the government handouts, which is really just the government returning money that it's taken in the form of taxes, which is what taxes are for, actually. Like, taxes aren't really supposed to be for creating a standing army so big that it could destroy the planet. You know, they're for helping your nation survive. They're for like allocating. Taxes are so that the government can allocate those resources effectively. So the government giving back money that it's taxed from people to let them buy bread is bad, because they say, you know, inflation has to happen. Then in that case, it's like a moral responsibility for the person, the owner, the seller of a good, to do an inflation on everybody, and then everybody gets less ultimately. Despite the fact that, you know, the COVID relief money brought people out of poverty, it demonstrably improved a lot of people's quality of life. And the fact that, like, the video didn't get into this, but there are more responses. They say something to the effect of, you know, productivity staying the same, or it's even worse under COVID, which is like a fair point. Like, supply chains were impacted, but as Richard Wolff also says, you don't see it go the other way. When supply chains get better, the prices aren't going to go back down. When the supermarkets decrease their labor costs by inventing and installing the automatic self-cashiers, the prices didn't go down. So something's a fib here. Something's a fib. If if the market pressures that cause prices to increase are so delicate and so dramatically affected, why doesn't it work the other way too? Mysterious. But also there are other problems to address, like waste. Like, you know, what is it? Like, we waste, for every bite of food we eat, we waste another bite. I have a big plate of cold spaghetti. I'm talking about food waste. I have a big plate of cold spaghetti I'm going to have to eat. In the same way that the sort of people who made that video that basically asserts inflation is inevitable, inflation is the right thing to do, when you give poor people enough money to afford the basics, you have to do an inflation to them. The same people who have that mindset as just a given, as just the natural order of goods and exchange and trade, they're also the people who are deciding on the qualifications for hiring. So the effect of inflation happens too. And when you have a universal spell checker that says something like, let's get your ideas across, let's eliminate evidence that one of your weaknesses is your ability to get your ideas across. Let's prevent you from learning that skill. Let's automate it. Let's automate it, but not decrease the cost for everybody, acknowledging that now that facet of the labor that's being collectively performed by us is decreased. Instead, saying, let's automate it to increase what you can potentially ask, although that's not really how it works, what you can potentially ask for your labor. Let's increase your value as an individual worker with automation, so that you can get a better life. But let's also let everybody else do it. Then you've just raised that bar again. And if you're fine with that and cool with that, cool, great. I mean, it bugs me. It bugs me because I am romantically attached to the idea of a university being a place where people who can make the most of it get to. Where university admissions test for that ability and then hone it in people who have it and aren't simply open to literally everybody because everybody has to pay for university. And again, my issue is here, I should clarify, is not just like some people are so stupid they shouldn't be allowed to go to university, but of how deeply expensive it is, how crushing, how psychically terrifying and wounding it is that most people now are told and accept that accumulating an unfathomable amount of debt is to get the same skills as everybody else. Or even if you don't get those skills particularly really, nailed down in the old noggin, get the same qualification signifiers as everybody else. That's just a matter of course for becoming an adult. First, you're a kid and you're happy because you don't have to work and you get to play. Then you have to go to school and it sucks more shit that you can possibly imagine, but at least, maybe it's free. You go to public school and it sucks, or your parents are rich and you go to private school and it still sucks. And, you work really hard and you're like, I have to work really hard. I'm young and strong and I heal super quickly. And the only thing I really have to do with that is maybe sports, but I spend a lot of my time just, studying abstraction for the privilege of accumulating a ludicrous amount of debt in order to get a certificate that says effectively, this is me putting myself in like society's things to say. This is something I believe, but it's how I feel society sees it. You get a university degree that effectively says, I'm not a complete fuck up. I didn't do the equivalent of, a few decades ago, dropping out of high school. And university is high school too, the high schooling. And now you have tens of thousands of dollars of debt that you can't declare bankruptcy on, that you need to now immediately enter the job market, a hyper competitive job market, asking you for more experience than is possible because everybody has the same experience as you and therefore no one is remarkable, but business owners are only looking for somebody remarkable because their life in the competitive market depends on it. So you need to get a job that you're not qualified enough for, which doesn't pay enough to even pay down the interest on your loan, and that's all life. And Grammarly can make it a bit easier for you now and a lot harder for everybody who has to do it after you. Because you reaching the bar right now raises it more than can realistically be achieved by anybody coming after you. Just people will see that and say, oh, everybody writes these mechanically perfect essays now. I guess that's a baseline requirement. I guess either you have to be that skilled of a writer, develop that in high school while you're distracted by the fact that you're still a kid and you have, important kid business to get up to, wink. Or you develop it in university, or you realize that everybody else is automating it. You automate it too. You automate your creativity. You make your voice, your creative individual voice, a cyborg just to enter, just to get over the barrier of entry to the market, let alone be competitive in it. Like, that's just what we do now. I find that deeply upsetting. I don't think that's what university is for. I don't think everybody should have to go to university. I don't think university is good at being university when everybody goes to university. I don't think the currently existing institution that we call university is really university. All these discussions people have, the difference between the liberal arts and STEM courses. I remember at the time going through the process being conflicted as to whether or not I thought it was good or bad that English degrees didn't have work terms the way engineering degrees did. Because on one hand, like, those people will get hired into high paying positions as engineers basically as soon as they get out of school, because that's how the system works for them. Whereas, a university degree is a liberal arts degree is kind of like, did you have fun? Enjoy your paper. And, saying, all right, one of them makes you competitive in the market, prepares you for a job, has a streamline, has a funnel, has a conveyor belt, pipeline, has a pipeline directly from university into employment, directly from accumulating a massive amount of debt to working for years to pay off that debt. Okay, I guess, yes, in the context of the competitive marketplace, that's better because it's just more straightforwardly applicable. It's more cause and effect. I got all of the debt so I could start paying off the debt. Whereas the liberal arts degree is much more, you got the debt so you could, ephemerally prepare yourself to be a better sort of thinker or learner. You can pay attention, you read a book if you want, but who's got fucking time? You won't make as much money. I hear that. You won't make as much money if you make an English degree. There's not going to be as much of an investment. There's not going to be as much of a payoff for your time. It's like, what? To me, university is supposed to be the antithesis of that. And when that doesn't exist really at all in society, and they're just treated as like networking opportunities so that you can then get a foothold into not actually even performing any sort of, skilled abstraction like engineering, like design, like what have you, in the job market, but just sort of like middle management, because like you met this guy in college and like, so you guys started this thing and you guys are the sort of people who are the managers who say, I want 5 years experience in a 4 years in a specialization that has only existed for 4 years. If you become that sort of person through the connections that you make in university, again, not really what university is for, in my opinion. But it's what Grammarly is for. It's what spell checkers are for. It's what automating self-expression is for. I see that as deeply problematic. I see that as fundamentally a step further down a road that is worse for everyone. In the same way that a boomer, a couple of boomers, a mama boomer and a papa boomer, saying, I want my kid to go to university is good. Them saying, I want my kid to go to university so they can get a good job, so they can be someone else's boss, is bad. And them all saying that at once is catastrophic. I think making it a prerequisite that creative writing, professional writing, personal writing is done through the filter of automation. I think that's a nightmare. And if you disagree, I am happy for you, because your life is less nightmarish than mine. So this is a short one. I don't think I said anything like really, really horrible in it, which is good. Um, I don't think I think I was mostly coherent. I think the moments when I was incoherent paid off, and I have a giant bowl of spaghetti I have to go eat. Adios. Have a lovely day, aliens. Lovely, lovely day. What the hell?